Have you ever thought your life sucks? Have you ever thought that it might be due to an international cabal of capitalist interests trying to keep you down? Do you live in a major metropolitan area? Are you college educated? Do you hate your parents? Are you sick of the usual sermon from the disapproving school marms of YouTube?
Have we got a show for you?
There are some assumptions in international academia which are so overwhelmingly conclusive, so empirically proven that we've closed the book on that unfortunate chapter of history, that the only thing left for us is to analyze the corpse of this ideology so definitely dead that the only thing for us to do is to pronounce post-mortem. Communism, it seemed to many, was one such ideology of the 20th century, so cruel and manifestly unjust as to be nothing more than a shuddering footnote in history. This serves to demonstrate how profoundly unimaginative modern academia is.
Look who knows so much, huh? Well, it just so happens that your friend here is only mostly dead.
They still languish under this presumption, while on the internet, the channel Lady Izdihar is blessed with over 30,000 subscribers. And the point of Lady Izdihar's channel is to humanize the USSR, and to this end, she posts videos of herself such as putting flowers at a statue of Lenin and smiling uncontrollably at the prose of Mao.
Although the Chinese people still face many difficulties and will long suffer hardships from the joint attacks of US imperialism and the Chinese reactionaries, the day will come when these reactionaries are defeated and we are victorious. The reason is simply this: the reactionaries represent reaction. We represent progress. And what a response that is.
And I don't love psychoanalyzing people I don't know. I don't think it's productive, and it's all too often a justification of an ideology more so than an earnest attempt to understand another person. I think the majority of people on this earth are flawed but sane, and the highly disparate conclusions we embrace are a testament to how unusual the world truly is. But while Lady Izdihar might at first seemed like just another millennial woman from Seattle, sternly admonishing her audience to educate themselves, and, well, she is that.
Nobody has more respect for women than I do. Nobody.
She's also an example of one of the ways radicals tend to tell lies. If you asked Lady Izdihar about McCarthyism, for example, she's got a whole lecture queued up about capitalist paranoia.
I was thinking about the TikTok hearings a couple months ago, where we literally heard regurgitated McCarthyist slogans, perpetrated by US elected officials.
Which is weird because she openly celebrates that self-same communist infiltration of Western societies.
When you move to the United States and immigrate, you have to denounce communism and your involvement in any sort of communist party. And so in the Soviet Union, that kind of means denouncing your everyday life, since everything about the party is so ingrained into everyday life. And that's not even guaranteeing that you agree with that. It's just part of the process. I know plenty of people who've immigrated to the United States who are indeed communists, but they had to, check the box or whatever to say that they were not. It's literally a part of our process.
You got that? You're paranoid for suspecting that communist infiltrators have come to America, and also stupid for letting them in.
You a rotten liar.
They don't exist, and also are good. This can only be characterized as lies. They're demonstrable utterances of a contradiction from her, seemingly with self-awareness, selected for their narrative utility in the moment. Oh, and she also openly admits to stealing like it's a flex somehow.
The Soviet retail sector and consumer goods have come to epitomize all that is wrong with the socialist system and to explain why in the long run it could not last in the face of a capitalist West more capable of meeting the consumer needs of its citizens. Americans, would you agree? How are you doing? Can you afford groceries? Did you pay your rent on time? Have you ever had to resort to stealing groceries? How many homeless people did you pass today on the streets? I passed 7.
This might be a hot capitalist take, but stealing is bad, especially if you can afford all these Soviet trinkets and makeup and stuff. Maybe you should just make a budget. Or if you can't do that, there are food banks in the Seattle metro area. Maybe hit up one of those. Unless that is beneath her. Let me guess. Charity is the capitalist Western something or other according to Lenin's second treatise on the accumulation. The point is, she's quite literally a lying, thieving communist. And like most partisans, I would fully expect this observation about her dishonesty to be waved away as an ideological attack. But the truly sad thing is, frankly, I have no personal problem with commies if they're, normal, not gonna lie to me and steal stuff in my neighborhood. No, it's not the communism that's the problem here. It's her and her poor character, which discredits her and discredits her approach to the communist ideology by extension, not the other way around, which is far sadder for her in my opinion. Anybody can be wrong, but most people don't openly lie and brag about stealing as if it were cute and quirky. And while many people might just treat this woman like a lolcow and move on, we should, I think, be wary of reducing critique to mockery alone, even if the subject invites it. While a Northwest millennial woman praising Mao and a babushka might invite some good laughs.
I said, I do cherish women. I love women. My mother was like the greatest woman.
That might also allow her to suffer under the idea that mockery is the only response in absence of serious criticism. She sort of pompously exhorts her supposed haters to educate themselves in response.
This is a video for my haters. Please be inspired by me. I don't mean this in an egotistical way. There are a lot of people who don't like what I do and who attack me almost every day for the topics that I choose to cover. And for those who greatly disagree, who don't like my sources, who have a very different opinion or perspective than what I present, I highly, highly encourage you to do exactly what I do, and please make your own videos using the sources and information that you want out there. If you have a lot of pent-up disagreement, maybe even hate towards me because of what I do or provide, please channel that into providing your own information and saying the things that you wish were being heard out there, because that's what I do with my frustrations. You can absolutely be a hater, but please be a productive one.
And while there's something poignantly human about this, she should not be given the space to suffer under that notion. If people laugh at her, as far as I'm concerned,
you brought this on yourself.
But she does make some fair points from time to time.
We can't define people's everyday lives, culture, little small things that just humanize these people and this past when we only address the negative.
I totally agree with this. No ifs, ands, or buts, no caveats at all. And insofar as this is what Lady Izdihar is doing, I appreciate that and support her, actually. All people in history deserve their humanity recognized and honored, and good on her for doing it for this group of people.
So I made something today, a scale. I really wanted to help people visualize why things are the way they are in the Western world and our perception. And I call this scale the Soviet life or Soviet perception scale. Let me show you what I created. So first and foremost, I want to say that what's good or bad is completely subjective, and I'm being incredibly vague on purpose here. And I suppose that's what's so frustrating about history, is that people who live stable, normal, average lives, their stories don't get told as much because there's nothing to say. They were just living, and things were okay for the most part. Maybe some less okay or more okay than others, but it is unsubstantial.
I also really like her scale. I think it represents a certain type of truth which would hopefully furnish us with a lesson in moderation as we consider not only Soviet communist society, but liberal republics like our own, monarchies, and even fascist dictatorships. For further info, see my video, Roots of Radicalism. It's a reminder that good principles can come from anybody, left, right, and center. of whatever character, good or bad. It would be equally dishonest for me to dismiss this principle by association as it would be for her to selectively apply the principle exclusively to Soviet society. It is a legitimate and genuinely insightful lens, but I say lens rather than reality because we don't judge societies solely on this metric. Another metric we tend to use and more often colloquially use is the harm scale. If a method of government produces more suffering, more crimes against humanity, more instances of evil, we typically pay attention to these more so than the experiences of the average person. By her metric, strictly speaking, we may judge not only Soviet Russia, but also Nazi Germany as good. And well, I think that's actually perfectly fine in terms of a lens-based approach to history. I doubt this woman, the partisan that she is, would welcome the comparison. Lady Izdihar would, of course, bristle under the notion that the scale ought to be applied to the Nazi regime according to the premise that to do so would be to perhaps implicitly justify or ignore the aspects of the Nazi regime which were exceptionally corrupt, exceptionally wicked. The Nazis might not, it would seem, be entitled to this consideration on the basis of the evil of their leadership and the magnitude of their evil actions, not actions of barbarity common to all history and every non-modern society, such as conquest, oppression, slavery, and corruption, but a new, greater height of depravity only possible with the efficiency and organization of the 20th century, genocide or mass internment. But the Soviets did that, and she loves the Soviets, so what's she gonna do now? Well, one tactic she uses is to try and discredit the victims of communism.
But there are people who move and they don't like the decision they made. They see what's around them and they are not happy with the West, but they have to justify their decisions. And a lot of interesting psychological things can happen there, where you do truly start to create this bias in your mind that you made the right decision despite not maybe initially thinking so. I don't think I'm describing this very well, but I hope you understand what I'm saying. I've actually met a lot of Russians who moved out of the Soviet Union, or moved when the Soviet Union collapsed. That's not the best word to describe that, but you know. And they now regret the decision, and many have moved back, so that is a real thing. Also, as time goes on, you might misremember things. In your justification for your decisions, you will, of course, make your past seem bad. Or if it was truly not great, you might remember it as way worse than it was. God forbid you realize you made the wrong choice, because now you have to do some mental gymnastics. So of course, naturally, as I mentioned, that left side is what's going to be predominantly seen by English speakers, those who might not have any other introduction to Soviet life or Soviet history.
That's a doozy of a claim. For the dissident victims of communism, she diagnoses its lies, cope, and denial. Like a battered woman,
I have great respect for women.
she will insinuate anything, excuse anything, craft psychological profiles of people she's never met in order to insist that her darling really isn't that bad. Any critique of her beloved is likely from some deep psychosis, whoever the person may be. In her mind, there is no righteous dissent, and the flaw is more likely with the victim or the witness. Nor is it particularly relevant that she may hide behind the word some. This unspecified some is as lethal as if she had said all, because since it's not anchored in any specific example, it can be cast onto any person potentially making the claim. The shadowy some, which in practice means whoever. She's rhetorically reserving this bullet to be employed when desired in order to discredit the accounts of other people who don't share her point of view. I don't think direct confrontation is really her style, but this insinuation can forever lurk in the background of dissidents and victims of communism in order to discredit them, without ever having to allege to their faces that they are lying about their lived experiences. Furthermore, according to her, While we in the West, with our freedom of speech and of the press, are brainwashed, and the lived experiences of the dissidents are coped, the perspective of the authoritarian Soviet Union ought to be given deference.
They are only seeing what's been translated, which consists of all those variables that I have mentioned. And on the right side, you have the largely untranslated and untold stories, be it because it was not important to translate them into English, or they maybe go against the narrative that we want to tell our citizens in the Western world and in the United States.
One of the problems Lady Izdihar runs into is that it's very difficult to verify and trust statistics and reports from an authoritarian regime. Remember how China had 0 COVID cases for like 3 years? And well, if you take her self-satisfied advice and do your own research, you will quickly find that Soviet history is absolutely littered with examples of fabricated statistics, cover-ups, and cover-ups of the cover-ups. But the really funny thing is, since the Soviets are so ideological, you don't even have to go that far. They'll tattle on themselves. When Lady Izdihar herself tries to explain the Soviet perspective behind crimes against humanity, such as the mass internments of the kulaks, she doesn't even seem to realize how tremendously dystopian she sounds, even while trying to justify the crime.
Now we are able to carry on a determined offensive against the kulaks, to break their resistance, to eliminate them as a class and substitute for their output the output of the collective farms and state farms. Now the kulaks are being expropriated by the masses, who are putting solid collectivization into practice. Now the expropriation of kulaks in the regions of solid collectivization is no longer just an administrative measure. Now the expropriation of the kulaks is an integral part of the formation and development of the collective farms. Consequently, it is now ridiculous and foolish to discourse on the expropriation of kulaks. You do not lament the loss of the heir of one who has been beheaded. There is another question which seems no less ridiculous, whether the kulaks should be permitted to join the collective farms. Of course not, for they are sworn enemies of the collective farm movement.
And this pamphlet, Dictatorship and Democracy in the Soviet Union by Louise Strong, which I highly recommend you read. The entire PDF is available online for anyone to look at. In fact, the first topic after the introduction is the drive on the kulaks. So let me read it to you. Let us seize the sharpest horns of the bull at once, the exiling in recent years of perhaps 1 million kulaks, the better-to-do peasants who exploited hired labor, from their rural homes in European Russia and Ukraine to Siberia and the northern woods. Here is an action which caused in America wide comment. What was the process? How was it carried on? The usual assumption outside of the Soviet Union is that the exiling occurred through drastic action by a mystically omnipotent GPU. The actual process was quite different. It was done by village meetings of poor peasants and farmhands, which listed those kulaks who, quote, impede the collective farm by force and violence, and asked the government to deport them. In the hot days of 1930, I attended several of these meetings. They were harsh, ruthless discussions, analyzing one by one the best families which had grabbed the best lands, exploited labor by owning the tools of production, as best families normally and historically do, and who were now fighting the rise of the collective farms by arson, cattle killing, and murder. Meetings of poor peasants and farmhands discussed them, questioned them, passed on them, allowing some to remain, but listing others as dangerous to our peaceful development should be deported from the village.
Untranslated and untold stories, which, when she translates and tells, become only more vivid in their monstrosity.
Let your evil shine.
Maybe go against the narrative that we want to tell our citizens in the Western world and in the United States?
Not at all. It fits like a glove, actually. Give us your land, give us your stuff. And if you have a problem, to the gulag with you. Yeah, that actually checks out. And the fact that she thinks this is somehow a win for her shows how tortured her worldview has really become. It's not even eat the rich. That I can wrap my head around. It's more like eat the property owner, eat the farmer.
And it's so important to understand that side of the discussion.
This is a very funny tactic to make it seem like you hold some nuanced middle ground. It's, I think, a sort of attempt at weaponizing most Americans' noble instinct to resist seeing the world in absolute black and white. We know that the truth is more often than not difficult to fully know, but we don't just like nuance for its own sake. We like nuance when and to the degree it is appropriate in our judgment in a given situation. Just saying nuance over and over again is not actually a nuanced point of view. You have to inject a new perspective which explains how the situation is more complicated. Lady Izdihar does the opposite. She just says words like nuance and perspective and then goes right on to demonstrate how unusually clear and indisputable Soviet criminality truly was.
Anything published in the English language or by an American university is going to inherently frame the Soviet Union as negative and less than the United States, worse off.
A big theme in Lady Izdihar land is that her haters are just too propagandized to educate themselves on communism, as though poring over some text of Lenin whipping himself into a fury about the Mensheviks or whatever is how we should be spending our Saturdays. This is something I find with all my communist friends, honestly, because when they say research, they don't mean it like a normal person does. They mean don't criticize anything unless you've read this obscure book by this communist author that will explain everything away. And then if you do that, there's either another thing you gotta read, or they've already moved on to a different splinter of the ideology. Haven't you heard, idiot? Trotsky is out. Do your research. Let's assassinate him in Mexico. Even one of Lady's favorite simps of socialism,
Anna Louise Strong, whose life is completely intertwined with the Soviets,
who she references with almost biblical reverence and consistency, was, of course, just another intensely ideological communist. Like any good communist, Anna Louise Strong loved Trotsky. He even wrote the foreword to one of her books, until Trotsky was out, that is. And by out, I don't just mean assassinated in Mexico. His two sons were assassinated as well, because that's what happens to people who are out in the USSR. When you're out in the USA, you get canceled. When you're out in the USSR, you and your whole family gets assassinated outside of the country. And I'm sensing a pattern here because Anna Louise Strong privately said that because of Soviet agricultural policy in the Ukraine, there had been much cruelty and terrible injustice, while publicly publishing a work that said how loyal is the Red Way, how the collective farm loves the Soviet government, which gives it land and seed and bread and now sends tractors, how wonderful the club work, how fine the choruses and dramas.
Such a nasty
trust fund by making sure that we have sufficient.
And on the subject of work camps, Strong said that the imprisoned were free to leave if they like, but they prefer to stay, for they find there in the camps a normal life, which is better, more interesting than the abnormal one they lived outside.
Are you not ashamed of yourself? Are you not embarrassed? This is really embarrassing.
And the answer is no, she likely was not embarrassed, because in her words, I tell not the whole truth, for the truth is never whole. There are always at least two truths in conflict, the truth that is dying and the truth that is coming into existence. Let your evil okay, my bad. I just didn't read enough Soviet philosophy to realize that the truth is overrated. It's my Western capitalist rigidity. You know you've gone severely off the reservation when you don't even claim that what you're promoting is even true anymore. These sources Lady Izdihar wants us to educate ourselves with, as opposed to testimonies from the refugees from the USSR. But sadly, even Anna Louise Strong's slavish devotion to communism couldn't save her from the fickle fortunes so characteristic of figures within the USSR. She was arrested, imprisoned, and finally expelled from the Soviet Union in 1949 under claims that she was a US spy. The only reason she probably wasn't disappeared was precisely because she was a US citizen. And for this reason, by the way, I wouldn't even be surprised if she was denounced as Western propaganda too by many of her comrades. Anna Louise Strong is out. So honestly, hats off to Lady Izdihar. I, and most of y'all, had probably never heard of Anna Louise Strong before this. Now we have yet another example of the tragic absurdity of 20th century communism. So thanks for that, Lady Izdihar. No Western or dissident account could be more damning than the Soviets telling on themselves. Thanks for bringing it to everybody's attention, putting in the hard work for global capitalism. Couldn't have done it better myself. So until next time, comrades.
Terror's the least I can do. Soon she will feel that her nightmares are real.